Hey everyone, and welcome back to Visceraverse. Today we're starting our very first lecture in our anatomy playlist, starting off with part 1 of our head and neck anatomy. We're starting off with the occipital bone, one of the most important bones, and this is your foundation that connects your brain to your body, so let's dive in. So when you think of it, your head is apparently not just floating, it's supported by a whole system, starting off with the bones. Cervical and thoracic vertebra are one of the most important structures that are supporting your head, plus upper ribs and the clavicle itself. Lastly, it's the occiput, the base of your skull that is holding up your head. So our plan here is to discuss the bones, and then joints and ligaments, and then muscles. First, let's talk about some basic skull architecture. When you think of the skull, I want you to think of it as two parts, the cranium and your facial features. Now, the cranium, think of it as a container for the brain, and it's made up of fused bones. These fusion lines are called sutures, and we're going to learn about them shortly. The key cranial bones here are your occipital bone, your parietal bone, the temporal bone, and your frontal bone, and not to forget the butterfly-shaped sphenoid bone. This is our star of today's lecture, the occipital bone. And when we're looking at this occipital bone inferiorly, we'll see a very big hole. This hole is called the foramen magnum. This great hole is for the passage of the spinal cord. It's what connects your brain to the rest of the body through the spine. That's the passage of your central nervous system. Let's talk about the occipital bone in more details. The M.C.E. mnemonic is my way of remembering this, and that stands for my curly hair, because it is, ends. Alright, so M stands for the foramen magnum that we discussed in the previous slide. It's a hole in the middle of your occipital bone. You can see it when you're looking at the inferior view of your skull. And again, this is important because it creates the passage of your spinal cord from your brain to the body. C stands for occipital condyles. These are two curved joint surfaces, as you can see here, and they are located anterior to the foramen magnum, and they articulate with C1 vertebra, and we're going to discuss this in more details in another video. E stands for external occipital protuberance. This is the prominent bump in the middle of your skull, located right here, and it's a part of the squamous portion. It's right behind the foramen magnum. So an easy way to remember that is here's your foramen magnum in the center, anterior to it are the condyles, and posterior to that is your external occipital protuberance. Why is it important? It's a muscle attachment point for neck ligaments. And from there, as we're going to see more clearly in the next slide, we have superior and inferior nuchal lines. Again, here's the external occipital protuberance, and here are the superior and the inferior nuchal lines. And the yellow part is the squamous part, the condylar part again in red here, and the basilar part is in green. And as opposed to the previous slide, here we're looking in a different direction. We're looking inferiorly again, but here is this part is the anterior part, and this part is the posterior part of your skull. So it's more like a flipped image. So let's talk about the basilar part in more detail. Now, when you think of your occipital bone, I want you to think of the foramen here being in the center, and this is our point of reference, because we're going to think then of structures anterior to that and structures posterior to that. The structures anterior to it, as we discussed earlier, that we see from the inferior view are your occipital condyles. One more important structure that is anterior to that is your basilar part. Posterior to the foramen magnum is the external occipital protuberance, and this is an attachment point for muscles, and your actual part that is called the squamous parts. So again, we have the squamous part, and here we have the basilar part. So what for the basilar part? The basilar part is very interesting because when we look in a cross-sectional view, we're going to see that it looks more like a triangle. It's more thick here. And it articulates with the temporal bones and the sphenoid bone. It forms the central skull base. You can see it here, right in the middle of your skull. Moving to the squamous part, just as we said before, here's your foramen magnum, and this is the posterior part of your skull, and this is the anterior part. Here's the foramen magnum again, and posterior to that is your squamous part. Muscle attachment sites here again, your external occipital protuberance, and from there you want to think of your superior and inferior nuchal lines. That's it for the squamous part for now. So after everything we discussed so far, why is the occipital bone important? Why does it matter? It's because it has the foramen magnum, and this is the passage. This is the brain stem passage connecting your head to your body, and this is a very critical point. Occipital condyles, the yes motion, imagine yourself nodding yes. This is the atlanto-occipital joints, and that's why occipital condyles are very crucial here. Muscle attachments. Your head posture and movement depend on the many muscle attachments that we see on the occipital bone. And then lastly, the basilar part. This is your skull base and it's important for stability. Let's do a quick recap. Here we're looking at your skull from a posterior view. This is your occipital bone, covering your posterior part of your head, plus the inferior part if we're looking inferiorly. Again, here's the foramen magnum. We want to cut it in half. Posterior to that is your squamous part of the occipital bone. Anterior to that, the base of your skull, right? This is the basilar part. Then, you want to think of the condyles. These are important for the atlanto-occipital joint. And the external occipital protuberance with the superior and the inferior nuchal lines. That's it for today, guys. Stay tuned for the next video. It's going to be about the temporal bone, so see you there. That's it, guys, for the occipital bone for today. I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe and like this video if it helped you understand the anatomy of the occipital bone. Lastly, I'd really love to see you as a part of our Visceraverse community, so see you on Instagram and see you in the next video.